Ready? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala sayyidil awwaleen wal akhirin nabiyyina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, master of the first and the last, and upon his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for another opportunity to reflect upon His mercy to humanity. And that mercy coming in the presence of prophets and messengers who brought divine guidance to humanity to give us a way out of this confusing world that we live in. And also His divine mercy in after sending the last prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, peace and blessings be upon him, that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put into our nation an ability to renew the message. And that is something special about this last ummah. And it is reported that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has informed us and told us, "Inna Allah yab'athu li hadhihi al-umma ala ra'si kulli mi'at sana may yujaddid laha dinaha." That verily Allah will raise up for this ummah at the head of every century someone who will rejuvenate for them their religion. And we know that other traditions have said instead of mi'at sana, 100 years, ala ra'si kulli qarnin mujaddid, at the head of every century. Or qarn also means generation. So when 100 is used, it doesn't mean specifically exactly to the point of 100, but it's basically a movement through a generation, around 100 years or so as a cycle, that there would be somebody or a group of people or individuals in different parts of the world who would be inspired to renew the faith. And this concept of tajdid, we found out, is a concept that is not defined by reform. So as Islam, as a way of life, is moving through time and space, there are certain set principles within this way of life that need to be applied to the different places and the different times. So what was happening in Arabia 1400 years ago, in terms of technology, in terms of lifestyle and whatever, it's not exactly the same as what is happening today. But the principles that were revealed need to be brought back to life in a new context. So the principles don't change, the context of where they're applied changes. And the problem that some people have is that they change the principles based on the context. So that is reform, right? But in ours, the principles remain the same, and they come to life in a different place or in a different situation that people find themselves in. And the concept of the mujaddid has been discussed by scholars, and there are different folk lore surrounding mujaddids and mahdis and people like this. And from the explanations that we had, one of the beautiful explanations by Sheikh Jalaluddin as-Suyuti, rahimahullah, who some people actually may consider to be a mujaddid himself, although he never actually claimed this. But the concept that he put out, and when we look at the different people, and we want to look at three mujaddids in our class, inshallah, remember these concepts. Okay, so we're looking for certain qualities within the individuals. And the ulama expressed it in a concentrated way. And Jalaluddin said, tajdid, revival in the religion, means renewal of its guidance explanation of its truth, as well as eradication of evil innovation, that is bid'ah, right? And eradication of extremism, and also or laxity in religion. So this is part of the tajdid, that it's going to bring back the sunnah, deal with innovations, but also extremism as well. So keep people in a balanced way, and also those who are lax in their religion because of the new context. It also helps them to stay on the straight path. The other point that he said, which is interesting, is that tajdid also means observation of people's benefits, societal traditions, and the norms of civilization and sharia. So the tajdid observes this. The tajdid takes into consideration, right, what's going to benefit the people. And people's benefit might not actually be the same. So you might find focus on certain points more important at certain times than in other times. And some call it fiqh al-waqi'. Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, when he looked at the 5 pillars of Islam, right, mentioned that in fiqh al-waqi', that you have the 5 pillars of the tawheed, of the salat, of the zakat, of the fasting and the pilgrimage. But in the time of a drought, in the time of a famine, then the institution of zakat, that pillar of giving, would become more important than, for instance, the pillar of going to Hajj. Even though they're all compulsory, but if people are starving to death, then dealing with priorities, your priorities show you that you know the religion is to benefit people. So what is the benefit of people going over and over to Hajj when people around them are starving? So that's like, you know, looking at fiqh, you know, in a practical way that Imam al-Shafi'i used to do. So, and then the qualities of the mujaddid. We want to also just remind ourselves again as we go into the area of some of the qualities discussed by the scholars. That this person should be an excellent Muslim in thought and attitude. Okay? So it's not only their thinking, but their attitude, right? Which is important, how they approach things. And also the person should have a thorough and comprehensive grasp of Islam. So this is not somebody who studied an aspect of Islam, who suddenly considers himself to be a mujaddid. They should have a thorough, comprehensive knowledge. Okay? Also, the ability to distinguish Islam from un-Islam in the finest details. So the mujaddid, the one who renews the faith, needs to be able to make that detailed analysis of the deen. Also, the ability to extract the truth from long-established falsehoods. So there may be falsehoods within the society that have been around for a long time. And that person can bring the truth out of them. Because sometimes cultural practices that Muslims do are actually, might have originally been something true, but over time and through culture, it changed. So the mujaddid has got to be able to go to the source and be able to bring out the truth in the face of these falsehoods. The mujaddid also needs to have a clear mind, penetrating vision, and unbiased, straight thinking. So it's got to be a clear thinker. Okay? Also, the ability to see the right path, clear of all extremes, and to keep balance. And this is not an easy thing to do, especially in the fact that human beings tend to go to extremes. Okay, so that's not easy. Also, the ability to think independently of the contemporary and the century-old social and other prejudices. So there may be certain prejudices that develop in the society. He's got to be able to overcome the prejudice, right? And to think, as they say, outside the box, right? And also courage, shuja'ah, the courage to fight against the evils of the time that the person is living in. And this is not easy. And a technical point, they should be competent in ijtihad and the work of reconstruction. So they should know how to apply Islam to new circumstances, how to reconstruct, not only to take things down, but to reconstruct. You'll find many teachers, they give you a lot of criticisms, they take everything down, they find everything that's wrong, and then they leave you. So when you need to rebuild it, they don't really have many suggestions. That's not the mujaddid. The mujaddid points out the wrong, but also reconstructs. See, reconstructs the thing. So the person we're looking at now, Sheikh Abdullah al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, who lived from 1058 to 1111, of the Common Era approximately. And to understand Imam al-Ghazali and the other mujaddids, we need to understand the setting. What is the circumstances that this person appeared in? And the more you understand the circumstances, is the more you can understand the impact of the person, right? And how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used that person in that particular time. So the setting he comes in is the time of the Abbasid Caliphate. And as you know, after the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were the Khulafa al-Rashidin, they're the rightly guided caliphs, and following them, the Umayyad dynasty. So the Umayyads ruled for a period of time, and then they were succeeded by the Abbasids. And the Abbasids then spread Islam to a distance. And if you can see on your maps how they spread Islam and moved it solidly way to the east. People had penetrated the places before, but in terms of governing the place, these are the areas that they governed. Okay? And so this is Banu Abbas, the Abbasids. And a very important incident happened during the Abbasid period. And that is that around the year 751 of the Common Era, and the Abbasids are now sending out dawah, and they're spreading Islam, and they're moving to different places now, calling to the good and forbidding evil. And they came in contact, or they came in direct opposition to the Chinese. And the Chinese at the time, the major was called Tang Dynasty. And this is interesting because, again, when you look at the past, think about today. Okay? This is the Chinese Empire, okay, the Tang Dynasty, which comes into a clash with the Abbasids, who are moving east, spreading Islam, calling to the good and forbidding evil. And the Abbasids, one of their allies was a Tibetan dynasty. So Tibetans were not just people stuck in monasteries high in Nepal. Right, they actually controlled a certain period of time. Buddhists, right? They're Buddhists. So the Buddhists actually they had a common enemy, in the Tang Dynasty, and so there was a unity that they had against their common enemy. And it was in 751 that the major clash happened in this valley called the Valley of Talas. Okay, and it was to control the Syr Daria region of Central Asia. And after several days of stalemate, a group of Turkish people called Seljuk Turks, they defected from the Chinese and they joined the Muslims. And because of their presence, it changed the course of the battle. And the Abbasids defeated the Chinese. Now this is a map here. Maps are dated. So you can't necessarily see your present-day societies. But Talas, you can see, is in the middle of this map. And look up to the right, the Uyghur Khanate. So remember the Uyghur people, right? Who are suffering under the Chinese dynasty now. They were there. They were a strong nation. Okay, also there's the Seljuk that is right next to them, the Uyghur people. The Tang Empire was spreading, going west. Right, and seizing land. The Tibetan Empire is down on the bottom. Okay? So you can see in these days there was no India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the countries that you know. That's how the map looked at the time. Okay? And going toward the center, left, you see Khorasan. So Khorasan is a very important area, which we'll talk more about later, which even comes in hadiths, this area of Khorasan. Okay, so the Muslims are now moving out of Iraq area, and it is in Talas, which is right in the middle. This is where the confrontation happened. Okay, and that would be somewhere in today, maybe Kazakhstan or something like that. It would be right in this central area of Central Asia there, where it came about. You can see below Talas Samarkand, that would be Bukhara, where Samarkand is. Okay, so the Talas is in the middle, and it was there that the Turkish people came in contact with the Abbasids. Now, they had not really known Turkish people, as a group. There were Turkish people coming in and out, trading and, whatever, but they didn't know the actual, what Turkish people actually meant. And to go back in this, you need to understand this properly and take a little time, although this is a big study. But in brief, the original home of the Turkish people is there in Upper Central Asia. And surprisingly enough, what is known as Mongolia, the Mongols and the Turks were actually cousins. They were from the original proto-Mongolian Turkish person of the Altai Mountains, which is a little bit north, up in Siberia and this region there. And they broke into different groups over a period of time. And it's surprising to know that, Genghis Khan, who is the most famous of the Mongols, his name, Temujin, is actually a Turkish word. And Temujin, amongst his forces, the forces of Genghis Khan, there were a number of Turkish people. They were not all Mongolians, because they were cousins. They were of Mongolian Tatar extract, but they lived in different areas, and because of climatic changes and intermarriage, they slightly changed, but the nomadic lifestyle of the steppe region was the same. They lived a tough life, so they were ready, they were prepared for pain, they were good horsemen, they could shoot their arrows, riding on horses, they could fight, in the desert, they could fight in the wintertime in the snow, they could fight in the mountains, they could fight in the jungle. There's nothing that could stop these people, right? This is an indomitable spirit of the people who lived in this steppe region, okay? And Allah knows best. Many times the circumstances that we grow up in influence our life. And when you grow up in tough conditions, when your family has grown up in rough conditions, then you naturally tend to be rough, because you have to be tough to survive. Okay, and that steppe climate is very, very difficult climate to live in. Extremely hot in the summer, extremely cold in the winter. In some places it's desert, the Gobi Desert, one of the most dangerous deserts in the world. Also mountain ranges. People are generally nomadic because they have to travel, where they can feed their flocks. So it's not an easy lifestyle. Okay, so these are the people that the Abbasids ran into now, who were mainly Arabs, Africans from Ethiopia and, Yemen and then Persia. And now they run into the Turks. Okay, and the Turks said something about them by the will of Allah. They leave the Chinese, because they were the main special forces for the Chinese. Wherever they go, they become special forces. Okay, so they leave them and they join the Muslims. And when you combine the Turkish-Mongolian lifestyle with the concept of striving in the path of Allah, then you come with a type of what they call Ghazi warrior tradition. And Ghazi is from Ghazwa. Ghazwa you would define as a battle. And even in Islamic history they say Ghazwat Badr, Ghazwat Uhud. And a Ghazi is a person who is fighting in the path of Allah. And so the combination of the spirit of giving yourself for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not fearing people, but fearing Allah, along with Turkish background and ability to fight, develops one of the greatest set of warriors in human history. And if you look at their influence in terms of wars in human history, this may be one of the greatest fighting forces in human history. Okay? By the mercy of Allah, this group, they accepted Islam. So now they became important to the Islamic society. So now amongst the Turks, who are, remember the Seljuk Turks there's different nations amongst the Turks. There's a group of the Turks called the Seljuks. Okay, so the Seljuks are Turkic nomads, right? As we said, from Central Asia, okay? And their original ancestor is called Seljuk himself, Seljuk, right? That's his name. And they're the Kinnic branch of Oghuz, the Oghuz Turk. And those who follow the Ottomans, right? And you follow, because everybody's watching Ottoman movies now and trying to understand the history, they talk about the Oghuz Turk, right? That this is their ancestor, right? And so they are a branch of these Oghuz Turks, and they start to move. West. And this is a picture. You can see a depiction of a warrior at that time. This is a rough-looking brother. Okay, this is a rough-looking person. You do not want to meet him on a battlefield. Okay, so this is the Seljuks. And around 950, Seljuk himself, he migrated to Khawarizm. And Khawarizm is at the top of Khorasan. It's a famous place in Islamic history. I'll just go back to the map to show you. If you look, see Talas, go to your left, follow that road, see Khawarizm? There it is. And it's right above Khorasan. It's like part of Khorasan. And it's famous because there are a number of scientists and scholars, Khawarizmi. You say Khawarizmi, right? Who developed algebra. When you say logarithms, it's Khawarizmi. There is a number of scholars who came out of this area. So they would call him Khawarizmi because he comes from this area. So it's a very important area. Enlightened people who are living in that north. So Seljuk himself, one of his great qualities was he could unite the Turks. So he united 9 major tribes. And he traveled with them into the area of the Khawarizmi area, right? And they embraced Islam. Okay, so with their embracing of Islam, you know, it changes the situation. Okay, so we'll take a break now, you know, with the Seljuks now in Khawarizmi, and we'll see you right after Salat. Billahi tawfiq.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا اعتدلوا الصلاة يرحمني ورحمكم الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم ملك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. فطاف عليها طائف من ربك وهم نائمون فأصبحت كالصريم فتنادوا مصبحين أن اغدوا على حرثكم إن كنتم صارمين فانطلقوا وهم يتخافتون ألا يدخلنها اليوم عليكم مسكين وغدوا على حرد قادرين فلما رأوها قالوا إنا لضالون بل نحن محرومون. قال أوسطهم ألم أقل لكم لولا تسبحون قالوا سبحان ربنا إنا كنا ظالمين فأقبل بعضهم على بعض يتلاومون قالوا يا ويلنا إنا كنا طاغين عسى ربنا أن يبدلنا خيرا منها إنا إلى ربنا راغبون كذلك العذاب ولعذاب الآخرة أكبر لو كانوا يعلمون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم ملك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم
some trouble with my mic?
Yeah, I told it to get these lines in for some reason. I don't understand what's happening.
Can't get on.
Yeah, I can't show this. It's only showing like the first. It's so strange. It's showing the first. It's showing only this one slide to them. It's just, I don't know how to change it to something that's so strange about it. That's what the people online are hearing.
Is it the sound is on?
Yeah, everything is on. You can just be whenever you're ready.
Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. So as we continue on in understanding the setting surrounding the life of Imam al-Ghazali, it's important to understand the role of the Seljuk Turks, because it is very critical. I mean, generally people tend to say Umayyads, Abbasids, and then they go on. But they don't understand what was actually happening toward the end of the Abbasid period. And that was that the Seljuks had played a very key role, and the whole society was influenced by them. And so they moved from Central Asia into Khwarizm, and then from there they moved down into the Khorasan area that we had seen. And I'll show you that a little bit more. And the Seljuks, what made them slightly different than other Turks is that they intermarried with Persian people. So they literally physically intermarried from living in the Khorasan, and then also culturally. So they took on a lot of Persian culture. And as you know, Persian culture is one of the ancient cultures in the world. The Sassanid dynasty, the dynasties there go back thousands of years. And so they inherited a lot of the artwork and the building and the different elements of culture, and also through the Persian language. So they were sort of a mixture of the Turkic culture and then the Persian culture. And they adopted the Persian language. They had their own version of Turkish, but they adopted the Persian language also as sort of a court language. Arabic is used for the scholars and whatever, but the actual language of administration and the courts to a certain extent was done in Persian, in the Persian language, okay? So here on the map, if you can see the map, I know students here, maybe some cannot see, but if you get a map that shows Khorasan, you will see in the, approximately on this map in the pink color that is there, you'll see Khorasan, which to the north takes in Uzbekistan, and then down to Tajikistan. And you can see Samarkand is there. Samarkand and Bukhara, all that area is considered to be Khorasan. And then Tirmidh. As you go down, you'll see Tirmidh, and that's Imam at-Tirmidhi. You know the hadith of Tirmidhi? That's where he comes from, right? So most of the muhaddithin come from this area. Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, you go down the major people of hadith. This is where they come from. So this became a center of learning and knowledge, this area of Khorasan. And you go down and you see Balkh and Meri, and then you'll see Bamyan, your Bamyan kebabs that you get at the Bamyan shops. That's Bamyan there, right? That's part of Khorasan, actually. And it goes down and takes in much of Afghanistan, is in it. And then over toward what is now Iran. So there you will see Tus, Nishapur. Okay, these are important places. So this makes up Khorasan. And this is a very important area because the Prophet ﷺ even said, there's one hadith that is saying, if you see black flags coming from Khorasan, he's talking about the end of time. If you see black flags coming from Khorasan, right, then go to those flags even if you have to crawl through snow. Because amongst them will be the Mahdi. The Mahdi will be amongst them. Right? So these are some deep hadiths, apocalyptic, right? Khorasan. And you'll see in history the role that Khorasani people have played in history. It's now divided up into the secular nation states, but this is originally how it was. So the Seljuks now moved into this area, and they began to influence society. And there's a number of Seljuk leaders. I've just taken a few of them for you, the key ones, for us in this state, although they go further than this. Tughrul Beg, he, after Seljuk, he was the most important of their leaders, and he also united the Turkomen tribes. So he had this ability to unite. So he united the Turkomen tribes, and they took on a strong form of Sunni Islam, the Islam of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And they felt that they are the defenders of Sunni Islam. Okay, and so with that, they began to capture certain areas. And again, this is a long story. You could take, but I'll shorten it for you. In that, after the death of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the division that had gone on amongst Muslims, and he was assassinated. His son al-Hassan was given the Khilafat. He gave it to Muawiyah. And then Muawiyah formed the Umayyad dynasty. Okay? Eventually, the Umayyads were defeated by the Abbasids. And the Abbasids were made up of people from the Arab tribes of Quraysh, also Persian people. And so the Abbasids took over the leadership of the world of Islam. And but the attack, to a great extent, that the Umayyads, one of the groups that they considered to be a dangerous group to them in terms of power, were the descendants, of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And the whole story of Hussein, radiallahu anh. And we've just come out of, the month of Muharram, which is really for us an important time of the saving of Musa alayhi salam and whatnot. But we all recognize the fact that there was a power struggle that went on. And when Yazid took over, the son of Muawiyah, Hussein and a number of people disagreed. And he thought that the people of Kufa in Iraq was going to support him. And they turned against him in the last minute and left him. And he was attacked by the Umayyads. And he was, slaughtered, rahimahullah, and his family, a terrible massacre. And so the people who were Ahlul Bayt, right, the close family of the Prophet, this is coming from Hussein and Hassan, because there's two lineages. Hassan has a lot. Hassan had 21 sons. So there's a lot of Ahlul Bayt that came from Hassan's side, although they're not usually mentioned. So, but the family of Ahlul Bayt represented for the Khalifas in the Abbasids another power group, right? Which should not have made a difference to them, because they were generally just spiritual type people. They were not into politics so much, but they feared them. And so pressure was applied, to the Ahlul Bayt, but they maintained, their religious practices, and they were considered to be similar to the regular people of the Sunnah. And it is reported that Imam Malik, the great Imam Malik of Medina, rahimahullah, he was a close friend of Ja'far as-Sadiq. And Ja'far as-Sadiq, rahimahullah, was one of the grandson of Ali, going down, and one of the great imams of the 12 imams of the Shia. But he was, in those days, he was a regular Muslim. There was no Sunni and Shia. Their salat was the same, their practices were the same. There was not a different group. But around the area of Kufa in Iraq, and then there were a lot of different occult groups. Remember, magic actually started in Babylon. As the Quran says, it was Babel that Harut and Marut came. So the magical occult underground groups were widespread in Iraq. Okay? Also, the descendants of the Persian dynasty, Sassanids, who had been defeated by the Muslims and ran up into Russia, they started coming back. And they wanted a way to get back in. So therefore, from the supporters of the Ahlul Bayt, another grouping starts, which is not the same as the scholarly, like Ja'far as-Sadiq and Muslim. No, they were just scholars. But this group wanted power, and then the occult thinking got involved with them, and they formed a type of, not political Shiism, but it was ideological. And they started to give authority and power to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, the Ahlul Bayt, as though they were almost like prophets. And they started cursing Sahaba, and all types of things was coming out of this group, right? So it is this group that is a combination of the occult, the remnants of the Sassanid dynasty, and also the supporters of Ahlul Bayt, who just wanted to support the family of the Prophet ﷺ, which all Muslims should do. They're all combined together, right? So sometimes you can't tell the difference. But the problem is that some of the occult groups seized power. They organized themselves. They got involved with rich business people, and they formed dynasties. One of the big dynasties is what is called the Fatimid dynasty. Okay, and the Fatimid dynasty, which is basically a Shiite dynasty, which originally came out of Iraq and then went down into Yemen. They were generally in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Okay, and then they moved to Tunisia, and then they based themselves in Cairo. And they believed that their imams and leaders were actually appointed by God. And they believed in a type of esoteric, it's like botania, it's occult type of teachings. And so some strange groups started to come, out of these occult groups, to the point where they even said at one point in time that one of their leaders, al-Hakim bi amrillah, they said Allah was in him. And it was all types of occult type of teachings was coming out, from this style. They also had architects, they had their own scholars. They built a lot of the masjids in Cairo. Okay, so they did a lot of things, but they were trying to seize power in the Muslim world. Okay, so the Seljuks, they took on the role to defend the Sunnah. They wanted to defend straight Islam, the original Islam with none of these occult type teachings and extreme type of teachings. The Islam of the great Imams, the Sunnah. They took this on. They saw themselves as defenders of the Sunnah. And so with their Turkish Ghazi spirit, they began to take back lands that were in the hands of the Fatimids, because the Fatimids took over a lot of places. So they began to take back lands to the point where you can see at the extent, of the Seljuk rule, you can see all of the green there on this map, And you can see that from over in Samarkand and all that area, Khorasan, also they took Baghdad, they took Damascus, Mecca and Medina, and they went into the Anatolian, province, peninsula, which is now Turkey. All that area was controlled by the Seljuks. And they did it for the Sunnah. That's how they saw themselves. Okay? So, Tughral Beg, he was the first one that went out. And he actually succeeded in taking Baghdad. Now, while this is going on, the Abbasids are still the Khalifa, right? But they were only Khalifa in name. Just like you have the Queen of England, right? But she doesn't really rule England. It's symbolic, right? There's a prime minister and, there's a parliament and whatever. It's like a symbolic rule. So the Abbasid leaders at that time were only symbolic leaders. And it was the Seljuks, actually had the power. And the Abbasids were very thankful to the Seljuks, and they even called Tughral the king of the East and the West. They start giving him titles, like special titles. Okay, and this is their symbol. They have Persian, that's their symbol with the eagles, right? That's not an American, dollar bill, right? These are the original, symbol. That's the symbol of the Seljuks. Okay, I don't know what it means. Maybe it's east and west the eagle's looking at. But the Seljuks then became very powerful. And one of the successes of Tughral was Alp-Arslan ibn Shagri. And he defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert. He defeated the Roman Empire. And he actually went into... he defeated them and he went into Anatolia. You see where Turkey is. And he developed, and they were officially, by the Abbasids, given the authority to rule in this area. So sometimes there's a section of the Seljuks they call the Sultanate of Rome, because Rome was Europe, meaning Byzantine Rome. So they said that was the Sultanate of Rome. Okay, so the Seljuks controlled out in this area. And Alp-Arslan, was an important ruler of their rulers. Jalal ad-Din, after Alp-Arslan, had been killed in one of the battles. Jalal ad-Dawla, Malik Shah the First. Right? They have amazing names in Arabic. For people who speak Arabic, like you jump back, Jalal ad-Dawla. He is like the majesty of the empire. So it's like a title, right? Jalal ad-Dawla. And then Malik Shah. Okay, so he took over. And he was a strong leader. Rukn ad-Din, right? He took over after him. So this is just some of the Seljuk rulers. Okay, so this is the force that was dominating, the region at the time of Imam al-Ghazali coming. Okay, so this is important. And it is underneath Alp-Arslan, right, and then Malik Shah, that a Persian man by the name of Abu Ali Hassan ibn Ali at-Tusi. Now remember Tus, and we're going to talk more about that place. You can see Tus where it says Khorasan. See just to the left of it. That's Tus. Okay, and Tus is a very important town. There's a lot of people who come from Tus, and I'll talk about some of them as we go along. But when they call themselves At-Tusi, right, meaning somebody who comes, from Tus. So the person's name was Nizam al-Mulk. Abul Hassan, actually his name was Abu Ali, his name was Hassan. Abu Ali Hassan ibn Ali at-Tusi. But he, starting off, he was a simple person. He was not Turkish. But remember, the Seljuks had taken on Persian culture. So they were related, to the Persians. They spoke Persian, but generally their leaders, the highest ranking people, needed a little bit of Turkish blood in them, because, the power of the Turks. But this person, Hassan ibn Ali, he rose in the ranks. His father was a zakat collector. The people who come around and collect your zakat. So he's a humble family. And he was a scholar. He entered into Islamic studies when he was young. But he had really good organizational skills. He is actually a very important person. He's considered to be one of the most important political figures in Islamic history. Him. Although most people don't know about him. But he's one of the most important political figures in Islamic history. And he's written books on siyasa, politics, Islamic politics. His texts on this are some of the most valuable texts. The Europeans have Machiavelli, who speaks about the prince. So Machiavelli, how to rule. This is before Machiavelli, right? This is the one that taught Machiavelli and all these people, how to, what is how to be a serious politician and how to administrate and control people. And so they gave him the title Nizam al-Mulk, okay? Which means Nizam is order. In Persian, they will say Nizam, right? So we'll call him Nizam, right? But actually in Arabic it's Nizam, right? But so Nizam al-Mulk, we'll call him that. He was such a good organizer. He rose quickly in the ranks. And, he reached the point under the Alp Arsalan, he rose in the ranks and he was given the position of wazir. Now this position of wazir is similar to what you'd call today prime minister. He's like a prime minister. He's not the king and the queen, but the prime minister effectively is the governor of the region. Okay, but he rules along with the parliament. So it's that kind of a thing. And so, he rose in the ranks. And it's interesting because when he was in school in Nishapur, and Nishapur is also an important place as well. Nesapur, they might pronounce it. That's where Abu Dawood, that's the hadith, the Sunan of Abu Dawood, right? That's where he comes from. So a lot of people, a lot of the ulama are coming from this area. Okay? So he, when he's studying in school, he has two classmates who become famous people. Omar Khayyam is one of them. Omar Khayyam is a very famous poet, especially in Persian language. He's a very famous poet and astronomer and scientist and whatnot. And also Hassan al-Sabah. And Hassan al-Sabah defected to the Shia ideology, and he formed a group because remember the Shias are now moving down with their 12 Imams. When they reach number 6 of the Imams who's supposed to take care of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, one of their leaders called Ismail was supposed to take over. But they felt that he wasn't capable of it. Some say he had alcohol problem or character, whatever. They didn't take him. But his followers wanted him to be the 7th Imam. And so he formed his own group. And that group is called Ismailis. Now, you would know the Ismailis today. That's where their name comes from. But there's a long history that leads to the Ismailis because it is from that time of Ismail himself. Some of his followers went to Syria. Some of them went to Yemen. They eventually formed the Fatimids. Right? And eventually, some of them, they were good business people, and they were on the trade routes that went from southern Arabia into East Africa, and also into India. And that's why in Bombay and other places like this, you have the Khoja people of these Ismailis, really good businessmen, and those. So that's where the Ismaili group, and their leader became known as Aga Khan. Right? That's the Ismailis we know when we're driving south on the Don Valley. Right? You know their place there on the Don Valley? Right? That's them. But this is long before that. Okay, so Nizam al-Mulk, these are two of his classmates. And, he rises in the ranks, takes this very strong position, and he is able to, and these are some of the amazing things that he did. He stamped out corruption. He was against corruption anywhere he could find it. He also encouraged business, trade routes. And what he did was, along the trade route roads, he strengthened the roads, and he built caravanserai. These caravanserai is like a hostel, a place to stay on the road. So as you're traveling along the road in a caravan, you come to this place, out the blue, and it's got rooms to stay, masjid, little business area. They call it caravanserai. And this is now what the world has developed along their roads. Now we stop, at a gas station to drink some Starbucks or Tim Hortons, right? But in those days, you stop at the caravanserai. So this is Nizam al-Mulk. He revolutionized, and the whole trade route, they call the Silk Road. The Chinese are trying to revive the Silk Road today, which went all the way from China and then went across the Turkic lands, right? And then the lands controlled by the Seljuks, and then down into the Mediterranean and to Europe. That's the Silk Road, right? So he revolutionized the Silk Road and built these caravanserais. He also built hospitals, and he instituted within their realm free health education, free health services. Okay? So they had their OHIP cards, of those days. If you're underneath them, you can get free doctors, and they had great doctors and physicians in those times. They were known for this. And you have the great Ibn Sina and so many great doctors, and this is where Muslims are really making great achievements. He also built masjids, and but one of the key things that he did was education. An area of education, because he was an educated person and he saw the value of education, he developed this madrasa Nizamiya. Okay? And so this madrasa Nizamiya, because this is his name Nizam, right? So he developed a set of these colleges. We'll call them like colleges. They were literally like colleges. Okay? So he developed them in a systematic way. In Baghdad, that was the biggest one. Isfahan, which is in Iran today. Nishapur, that's Nishapur, right? Which is in Khorasan. Mosul in Iraq. Basra, Iraq. And Herat. Herat is in Afghanistan, near the border of Iran. Okay? And so these Nizamiya colleges became some of the strongest educational institutions in the world, were these institutions. And with his money, because he had prosperity, when the government is strong and the soldiers are strong, and you have peace in the land, and you are encouraging business, right? You're flourishing now, and now you can spend the money on education. And that's why societies progress. And they say that's one of the reasons why that America, after World War II, prospered, because they started putting money into business people, experimentation, education. So, electricity, computers, so many things comes out of America. And that's the problem now, they say, with America and China, because the Chinese are investing in education and commerce, right? Whereas Americans want big guns, right? But so the Chinese society is overcoming American society, and that's where America's at crisis now, with their educational system. This is one of the points in history, where this education, flourishes. And because he has wealth, he is able to attract scholars. So he will put out to people around the world, come and teach in my Nizamiya school. Just like Harvard and Oxford will give a stipend and get the best scholars out of India, Africa, Asia, wherever and get them to teach in Princeton and Yale and Oxford and Sorbonne, right? Because they have the money. So they say, I'll give you a job tenure as a professor. I'll fund your experimentation. That's what they did. Okay, so this was a major move that was done with this Nizamiya Institute. And so when Arsalan passes away, Malik Shah takes over. And he loves Nizam so much, he called him Atabeg. So you have Beg and Atabeg. This is Turkish titles. Atabeg, Ata in Turkish is father. Anna is mother. So you say, Atabeg, you're the father of the Begs. The Begs are your lords, right? Your ruler. He's the father figure of the empire. So you got this name, this Atabeg title. And he continued to rule, but one of the problems he faced was Hassan al-Sabah. Now remember Hassan al-Sabah. He formed an underground cult. He connected with Nizari Shia, so many of them coming out of Fatimid Egypt, and he formed an underground group, and he went to a mountain in Syria, al-Mulk. And he went to this mountain and he got his followers, and he trained them in martial arts. He trained them in secrecy and fighting skills. They became like the Japanese call ninja. You know the ninja warriors that are dressed in black and they lay in your ceiling for an hour and then jump down and stab you. So they became like ninja. But what Hassan al-Sabah did, and I'm not making this up, he took the followers when he initiated them into his cult. He said, if you follow me and you die for me, you will go to paradise. And you will have beautiful maidens and you'll live. In this world, you're also going to have a good time. And so he had beautiful maidens for them. And they smoked hashish. Right? And so they were on this mountaintop getting high, surrounded by beautiful girls, trained in martial arts. And then when he said, I want you to commit to kill this person, they are totally committed. They are berserk people, drug addicts, right? And so from the hashashin comes, and from the word hashashin comes assassin in English, right? That's where the word assassin comes from. His people, Hassan al-Sabah, right? So they were the original assassins. I mean, there's assassins throughout history, but he organized assassins. And if he was against you, you got a problem. Because this person, if he's assigned to kill you, he will wait for you patiently as a beggar in the street. And he'll watch all your movements. He'll sneak into your house. He'll lay in your ceiling for 2 days. Right? And then he will stab you with a poison knife. And they usually like to stab leaders when they're coming out of Jumu'ah. So it's a public thing. And they jump out and hit you with a poison dagger, and then you die, like that. So Hassan al-Sabah, even though he was offered to come to work with him, he refused, and he got angry with him. And because the Seljuk stood for Sunni Islam, straight Islam, and the Hashashin were Ismailis in this underground cult, his assassin eventually stabbed Nizam al-Mulk, and he died, rahimahullah, under the knife of an assassin. Okay, so this is the background of the Seljuks and Nizam al-Mulk, the Nizamiya Institute. That's the condition of the Muslim world today, the struggle going on between the Fatimids in Egypt, and the Sunnah. The Fatimids were not defeated until the time of Salah ad-Din. When Salah ad-Din took over, the first thing he did in Egypt was he defeated the Fatimids and he instituted the Sunnah. Okay, and then he organized the people against the Crusaders. But the first thing he did was he turned Egypt into a Sunni area, of the Sunnah. Right? So I want to open up the floor for any questions or feedback that we have. This is a lot of history that I'm covering, but I'm doing it, so you have a general overview of the setting to understand more about Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. Question. Floor is open for any questions about any of these groupings that are there and whatnot. Floor is open.
The Seljuks came towards Persia.
Yeah.
The Persians already had accepted Islam?
Yes, the Persians were already into Islam, in Khorasan area. And so, by accepting the Persian culture, Islam is part of the Persian culture. Of course, there are groupings in it. You have Shia-type people, and Sunnis. But basically, you know what's surprising? Iran itself originally was a Sunni country. Because if you look back, at the area of Naysapur and Tus and all those areas, this is where all the Imams came from. So it was a Sunni area. The Shia were in Iraq. That's the homeland of the Shia, not Iran. Right? And it wasn't until later that the Safavids, when the Safavids come along, another century later, and the leader, he's a Turkish person, but he accepts the Shiism, and then he defeats people, and he institutes Shiism as the official religion of Iran. But before the Safavid time, it was Sunni. Okay? Question?
Who are the Ahlul Bayt today?
The Ahlul Bayt today, there are still people who are descendants.
Muhammad al-Yaqubi, Habib al-Jifri, like any others?
There's hundreds of people who claim to be, from the Ahlul Bayt. Okay? We have one here.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
That's what I've been told.
He's been told some of his descendants, Ma'mun, who's sitting there. So there's many people who have, Ahlul Bayt, descendants.
Clear distinction?
Yeah, I have met, when I lived in Medina in the 70s, I met somebody who was Ahlul Bayt, Sheikh Ahmed, and I don't know why, he just liked me because I'm American, like they didn't know any Americans, right? So he took me to his house, and he opened up this book, and he's showing me this family tree with all the names of the people and everything, and I said, okay, man, but he's proven to me, that he's Ahlul Bayt. They lived in Medina and everything, and so there's people like this who can actually, the Ahlul Bayt in the time of Umar ibn Khattab, and especially when the fitna happened, many of them moved down to the area of Hadramaut. That's southern Yemen. That's Yemen. Also, they went across the Red Sea into what is now parts of the Sudan, Eritrea, and in Somalia. And some of them went up into the mountains of Ethiopia, Harar. Okay? And many of them traveled along with the boats that traveled into even Indonesia. There's Ahlul Bayt people that are there. There's people who traveled to India. There are Ahlul Bayt people. But there are a lot of people who are pretenders. And they use the word Sayyid. So Sayyid in Arabic just means your master or your leader. Or sir, right? But Sayyid for some means someone who's Ahlul Bayt. Okay? Also Sharif. So if you see somebody with Sharif in his name.
From Misr.
Right. Or the Sharif of Mecca, were the people in Mecca and Medina who, were Hashemites. The king of Jordan, right, is actually from the Ahlul Bayt. Also the leaders in Morocco, they're from the Ahlul Bayt. Also the Ayatollahs who wear black turbans, not white turbans. If he wears a black turban, then he claims to be Ahlul Bayt. So they're all around me, but I found that some people, they were pretenders. Because one person said, okay, he was honest. And he said I said, okay, let me see your family tree, man. He said, no. What happened was a Sayyid came into our village. So everybody called themselves Sayyid. So they're not actually a Sayyid. But the Sayyid came to the village, so the barakah, the blessing of the Sayyid, they all took the name Sayyid. Yeah? And it gets a little bit out of control. But there are some people like the ones in Hadramaut there, and in the case of Sheikh Yaqubi, who's Syrian and, Moroccan background. There are some people who can trace clearly, their descendants back to Ahlul Bayt. They even have yearly meetings of people of Ahlul Bayt,
Imam Shafi was from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Imam Shafi, I'm not exactly sure. I believe I'm not sure.
I heard.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But there's many people who have that distinction. But with the Shia, they were directly connected to Hussein, because when the Muslims conquered Persia, they had prisoners of war, and the prisoner of war can be given to somebody as a right-hand possession. It's not a slave, you beat them and all that, no. It's more like a bonded servant. And so he was given Sher Banu, who is the daughter of the Shah of Iran. The princess of the Sassanid dynasty was given to Hussein. And so he freed her and he married her. And she accepted Islam. And the children under that have the blood of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the blood of the Persian dynasty, which for people in Persia was an important thing, right? They loved their kings, right? And the Persians believed God came through the king because they were fire worshippers and stuff. So that side of the family, they believed, had a type of divine blood that was in them. And so they believed that Allah chose members of that particular lineage to be, the Imam. They start using this term Imam. And, but like I said, the strange thing is that they didn't choose Hassan's family, right? He's the same, Ahlul Bayt. He had 21 sons, so he had plenty of descendants that you can follow in a, patrilineal way. You can follow the family. But they don't choose them. They took the one with the Persian blood. Okay? So it became like a divine family to them. Right? And this is where they became different than the Sunnah. Because with the Sunnah, if we can find somebody from the Ahlul Bayt who is a righteous leader and has all the qualities of leadership, we would prefer this person to be our leader, a Khalifa. But if we cannot find somebody, then from any group who is deserving to be the Khalifa, they can be the Khalifa. Whereas the Shiite position is only somebody from that particular family, of Hussein's side can be the Khalifa or the ruler of the Muslim world. Okay? So this is where the difference was. And the key point to remember is that the Seljuks, they stood for the Sunnah. Okay? And those of you who are studying the Ottomans have become very important for many people now. There's a series of movies about the Dirilic, the resurrection, right, that the Turks have put out now, translated into English. And it shows the Ottomans, the Ottomans came under the Seljuks. Remember the Seljuks' ability to unite Turkish tribes, right? So the Ottoman tribe, called Kayi, who are Oghuz Turks, right? They were one of the groups, and many of the Turks were fleeing west because of the Mongols. The Mongols were like, if you don't join them, they're going to kill you, right? So many of them said, no, we're not joining you, right? And they went west. And so the Seljuks provided land and employment. They generally would hire them as mercenary soldiers and, Ghazis. That's where the Kayi tribe, came in. And they served under the Seljuks. And when the Seljuks went down and got corrupted, and they lost their power, the Ottomans came up. And they became the leading Turkish tribe, and all the Turks united under the Ottomans. Okay, so that's the connection, very important connection between the Seljuks and the Ottomans, right? And that's what the Turkish people are trying to do today, right? Show that connection. And you'll see in Turkey itself, you'll see masjids and whatnot. You see that masjid there? This is actually a Seljuk building there. So you'll see masjids and centers that have their style of That's not like the Ottoman one that you see. So Konya itself, Konya, which is a famous city in Turkey, it was the Seljuk capital. It became their western capital, was Konya. Okay, and they were the rulers just before the coming of the Ottomans. Any other general questions anybody has? Floor is open.
When it comes to today, where are we like in organizing schools for learning? Like we know our brothers and our sisters will go Makkah, Medina. There's people opening up in the States where you can go now.
Right.
There are local community has things, but there's also Darul Uloom, which seems to be widespread.
Right.
I don't know much about them and how successful they are in
Yeah.
producing people that actually change community.
Yeah.
But how are we doing?
Well, during the colonial period, it was around the 19th century, especially when the European powers gathered in Berlin, and they decided to cut up the world into sections. And they had communications, they had military power, technology, and so they divided up the world into areas, the French, the British, the Belgians, the Germans, the Italians, and they set about conquering the third world, so-called third world. Okay? And when they conquered the Muslim world, there's only a few places in the Muslim world that were never fully conquered. Arabia itself, in the center, that was never really conquered. High in the mountains of Afghanistan, never really conquered. Some of the desert regions, Sahara regions, never really conquered. Sections of Ethiopia, never really conquered. But for the most part, the Muslim world was conquered. So when the Muslim world was conquered, they established their own educational system. And so in order to be an educated person, you had to learn English or French or Italian, and so the madrasa system, instead of being this innovative system, because they were studying not only Islamic studies, they would study astronomy, math, medicine, everything is in the Nizamiyah. Okay? So instead of being that type of institution, the British, for instance, in the Indian area, they divided it into secular knowledge and so-called religious knowledge. So if you wanted to have math, science, law, anything, engineering, you go to a secular school, right? And you learn the European language. If you want to study Quran, Hadith, and some so-called Islamic studies, then you go to the madrasa. So the madrasa systems became very narrow, and they cocooned themselves off. And they wanted to protect Islam. They were trying to protect the deen. So I don't fault them for that. But the problem is, the world changed technologically. So when the 20th century came, and independence came to many of the Muslim countries, the madrasa systems, like in Egypt, Al-Azhar University, and in Syria, and in many parts of the Muslim world, the madrasa systems maintained generally a narrow approach, to Islamic studies, and they were not up to the modern way of thinking, technology, right? So the struggle for the madrasa system now is to evolve, to develop. The problem with the brothers who study the Darul Uloom system was in India, and it came out of the Nizamiyah system, right? And you'll see many of the subjects that they study came out of the Nizamiyah system. But it's the subjects that are not science and all the things that it's just mainly they Hanafi fiqh, and it's a narrow curriculum. It's a strong curriculum, and especially schools like you have the Deoband school, which is one of the big schools, and Nadwa, the Nadwatul Ulama, a person called himself Nadwi, right? They were very strong. They're very strong in Arabic. And so the madrasa systems, were there. Indonesia also maintained madrasa systems. I lived in South Africa for 10 years in Cape Town. And there were Malays that were carried there in the 17th century. And one of their leaders, Sheikh Yusuf from Makassar, he brought, the knowledge. He was a great mujahid, and he brought the Shafi'i fiqh and the Quranic, teachings to Cape Town, and they kept the madrasa going. Right? But the problem with the madrasa systems is that they're narrow. So the crisis that they face now, how to evolve now to the world. The next problem, another crisis, or next problem that they're facing, is that because of the threat of Islam now coming up in the world, they have identified the madrasas as being sources of Islamic revolution. Okay? Whereas most of the madrasas are not even talking about that. You can't even disobey your teacher, never mind the leader. Right? They're not talking about that. But because fear of Islam in the secular world, right, they have identified the madrasas as the source of Islamic revolution. And so they have pressurized the schools, closed down the schools, terrorized the students. So many of the madrasas of the world, have been watered down and teachers, driven away. And we're now in a process of, regrouping our education systems, and our leaders. That's the process that we're in right now. And this is the important thing about understanding this history here, right? All teachers, leaders should really understand this history, because then you will see how madrasas like Nizamiya, how it developed, right? And you'll see how Imam al-Ghazali comes out of this and his teachings, right? And this, in the revival of Islam, there has to be a strong madrasa system, for not only male, for female as well. There's got to be a strong system where the students become excellent in Quranic studies, Arabic language, Islamic studies, and also, they are aware of secular studies as well. It combines the two, right? That's the struggle now. And there are even people in America and other places. In France, they have an Islamic university. In America, they're trying to develop Islamic universities. In Cape Town, they are trying to develop an Islamic university that combines. But it's not easy today because of the pressure that's being applied, in the recent times. Okay? So this is the background for the great Imam, Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala. And the subject of Imam al-Ghazali is a very deep subject, which would take 20 periods, 2 hours long to actually deal with, to be honest with you. But I want to give you, an overview of his life, and generally the changes he went through. And then inshallah we'll spend a period or two actually looking at his teachings. So you'll actually taste his teachings, right? But it's important when you read his teachings that you understand his life, because it's through the life of the mujaddid that you actually see how Islam's implemented in his life, what he went through, and the conclusions that he came to, and how he revived Islam. Okay? So generally speaking, Abu Hamid, Muhammad ibn Muhammad at-Tusi al-Ghazali. If he had a Middle Eastern passport, it would be Muhammad, right? That's the reason why Muhammad is the most popular name in the world today, right? Right? He got 3 of them in his, right? His passport would have 3. Okay? But there's his name, at-Tusi. So he's born in Tus, which is in Khorasan. But if you look at the map today, you will not see Tus. You will see Mashhad. In Iran, it's called Mashhad. Mashhad. Because one of their imams, Imam Riza, he is buried there. They call it, it's one of their great imams is there, the Shia imam, so they call it Mashhad. But originally it's called Tus. So anybody who's known as a Tusi is an important person. Ali Hijwari was born in Tus. He's the one in Pakistan, Data Ganj Bakhsh. Lahore, right? Has anybody been to Lahore? You go to Lahore, Pakistan, there's a huge place there. Ali Hijwari is one of the patron saints of Pakistan. They call him Data Ganj Bakhsh. Right? He was born in Tus, is where he's from. Ferdowsi, who's a great poet in Persian, and also Nizam al-Mulk. There are a lot of other people called Tusi. And you're going to go, when you're reading history, you're going to see people called Atusi. right? Which in the end of his name, which means he's born in that area. It was, to a certain extent, they say it was the hub of Islamic learning. It was one of the centers. And remember now, all these different Imams, Bukhari, Muslim, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, they're all coming from this area there. So their hadith studies especially, it was the best in the Muslim world. Bukhari's hadith and Muslim hadith, right, who's Naysapuri person, is considered to be the two most authentic books after the Quran, is the writings of these people. Bring in the hadith, right? That's how important this area was. So this is the area of Tus. These pictures I brought you, that's actually from Tus itself. And this is where he was. And, he comes from a humble family as well. And his parents, some biographies say that his father died when he was young, and his mother, who was a religious person as well. They started him in Islamic education from an early age. So he became proficient in Arabic language. Okay? Also grammar. He memorized the Quran when he was very young. Learned thousands of hadith. Remember, the hadith scholars are in this area, right? Also, by 15 years old, he had mastered the basic Islamic studies. By 15, right? And then he went further to Jurjan, which is close to Tus and Naysapur. It's another famous city. And he studied fiqh in Jurjan. And he was especially qualified in fiqh. Because fiqh meaning understanding, right? You got to have deep mind to understand fiqh. And one of the qualities that they describe him, they said he was an extremely gifted student with an unusual ability to grasp complex ideas and thoughts. He's extremely gifted. Anything you give him, memorized. He's got a photogenic memory. Okay? But not only that, his mind, he can penetrate ideas. He studies, he's like gifted. If he was in one of the schools here, he would be in Harvard University, U of T, at 13. You have some people, students like that, right? They're 13 and they're in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, studying technology, right? Because their brain, uses different parts that other people's brains don't use. So he had one of these kind of brains, right? So right from the beginning, he was a special person. At the age of 20, then, after having mastered so much, he then traveled to Naysapur. Remember the Nizamiya college, right? Remember Nizam al-Mulk? Because Nizam al-Mulk was now a leader. He's making these things. So he went to one of the madrasas, the one in Naysapur. And at that time, Nizam al-Mulk put out the word to all the scholars of the world. And he brought in the Imam al-Haramain, Abul Ma'ali, Abdul Malik al-Juwayni. Al-Juwayni is considered one of the great scholars in this century. Okay? So he brought al-Juwayni to the Nizamiya. And Imam al-Ghazali became a direct student of him. He studied Aqidah or Ilm al-Kalam, Islamic theology under him. And he also studied Shafi'i fiqh. Right? And later on, he also mastered logic, rhetoric, debating and all that, literary style. He became a master debater. And when he was a young man, 20s, early 30s, he's writing books already. This is how heavy he was. And he became so heavy, he was so brilliant, that nobody could debate with him. He would win every single debate that he was involved in. And he was so brilliant that al-Juwayni made him his assistant professor. And this person's only in his 20s, right? So he makes him assistant professor of the Nizamiya College in Naysapur. This is a major thing, because scholars from around the world are going there. And he writes al-Manqul min ilm al-Usul. He writes a book in his early days, which is the summary of the science of usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals of fiqh. This is one of his greatest areas. And later on you will see that his work, al-Mustasfa, this work is considered to be probably the greatest work ever written in usul al-fiqh. You have fiqh that studies, how to, Islamic jurisprudence, halal and haram and different things. Then you have usul al-fiqh. So that's your fundamentals. What is, for instance, halal, haram, makruh, right, mubah, all the different fundamentals, the foundations of your fatwas and your decisions. That's called usul, right? So his book on usul is, up until today, one of the greatest books ever written in Islamic history. Okay, so this is before you even think about him in other ways. Because some people say, well, Imam al-Ghazali, this guy was a Sufi and this guy was out to lunch and this and that. This man's writing in usul al-fiqh is the top in Islamic history. So you got to recognize who you're dealing with here, right? This is a very serious scholar. And he even went to, they say he attended some zawiyas, in the area. And this is where they were teaching tasawwuf. Now, what had happened in the Muslim world is that after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, scholars started specializing in different areas. And in the famous hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, hadith Jibreel, when Jibreel came to the Prophet ﷺ, he asked the Prophet, what is Islam, what is Iman, and what is Ihsan? Okay? Islam, 5 pillars, Iman, the pillars of Iman. Ihsan is righteousness. To worship Allah as though He sees you or you see Him, right? Like it's something not defined clearly. It's your spirituality, right? It's the highest level. Okay? So scholars like Sheikh Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, they became really deep in the spiritual aspects of Islam. So if you wanted to learn how to make salat, you go to a certain scholar. But if you have a problem with your salat, like, I don't feel like making salat, who do you go to then? The person who's teaching you how to make salat, he might not be able to help you. He can only tell you how many rakats do you make in this salat. But the one who studies ihsan, the spirituality, he can say there's something wrong with your heart, man. Your insides, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he extracts from the Quran and the Sunnah, the way. And as the scholars would say, that, tasawwuf in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was a reality with no name. This is one of the great scholars that came later on, said, Ahmed Zaruqi said. And he said, but in our times, it's now a name with no reality. And this is a Sufi scholar too saying this, right? He said, you all are pretenders. But in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it is a reality, zuhud, meaning abstinence, not dealing with this world. He didn't say, I am now going to be a zahid and I'm not going to eat food, I'm going to go in a mountain and live. No, he lived a simple life. He ate simple food. It was a reality, no name. Okay? And that's how it evolved. And people, when Islam started spreading and specializing, there were some people who were more geared toward that type of thinking and that aspect of Islam. So they started specializing. Okay, and this is where the concept of the zawiyas started to come in. Now, the difficulty was when they encountered Buddhism that had their own temples, Hinduism that had gurus, they encountered another type of spirituality. And that came into the Muslim world. So this is where difficulties came, where some of the zawiyas and some of the khanka, or whatever they call it, dargah, there's different names for it. Some of them became more like Hinduism or Buddhism than Islam. But the ones that had ulama, where it was a knowledge-based spirituality. They stayed within the Sharia. And this is one of the great things about Imam al-Shafi'i's life, Imam al-Ghazali's life, is that, you know, he is like bringing it in, right? He's giving you the balance, okay? But to understand his foundations, he was also influenced. He went to the Zawiyas, and he also learned, you know, some of the teachings, Imam al-Qushayri and other people who are famous scholars of Tasawwuf. He encountered these teachings, you know, there in that area. Okay? So the next level of his life really begins around 1085. And that is when Imam al-Juwayni passed away. So this is a crisis now. And al-Ghazali at that time was about 34 years old. And he was asked to be the head of the Nizamiya College, not in Naysapur, in Baghdad. And that is like the Oxford University. He's 34 years old. And Muslims consider 40 to be the place where you start getting wisdom, right? He's 34 years old. It's the youngest professor ever in, you know, the history of these universities. They never had anybody like this. You had great teachers and everything, but not the head above everybody. So you have 60-year-old scholars who've been around. This is a 34-year-old man. He's their leader. But he was so brilliant. He was so brilliant that he becomes the leader there in the Nizamiya College in Baghdad. And it's a time of, he flowers. He gives lectures. Hundreds, thousands of people come into his lectures. He's writing books. You know, he's studying all the different studies. You know, he's mastering everything around himself. He's like taking in knowledge, you know, unbelievable amount of knowledge he's actually taking in. And so this becomes a very high point in his life. But he reaches a point where he masters so much that he gets a little doubt in himself, because he can answer almost every question, right? And that's how we're human beings, right? And shaitan can come to you, and you start feeling a little bit doubtful about yourself, and you start thinking like, what, you know, he has this little bit of a crisis within himself. You know, so then he recedes a little bit from he's still in a head position, but he recedes a little bit, and he wants to study knowledge, to really put his hand on knowledge itself. Now, this is where the mujaddid part of him really comes in, because he goes into different areas of knowledge, okay? And he breaks knowledge down into 4 parts, okay? The first is al-Mutakallimun. This is scholastic knowledge, theology. So these are the people of, you know, the Quran, the Hadith, Aqidah, you know, like this type of thing, you know, people like that, who believe in the revelation, but they also use their rational minds. But it's revelation based, okay? He has mastered this area, okay? And secondly is the philosophers. And these philosophers are people who are rational thinkers. So today, under this area, it's not only just philosophers studying philosophy, it would also be scientists, like Dawkins and these people like that, the ones who, physicists and all that. So they're everything they got to reason, rationalize out. Okay, so that's another area. The third area of the esoterists, the ta'limi people, these are the Batiniya. And these are the Shia Ismailis and people like that. They believe in occult. They believe in the secret knowledge. And they believe that there is an imam or a teacher who's going to come and who's going to like liberate the world and bring all of things. This is Shia teachings, right? It's Batiniya. And there's a lot of groups of Batiniya. There's a lot of groups. If you go into these teachings, you'll see like all types of splinter groups, Nusayris, Alawis, Karamata, Duruz. I mean, some of them are around today. But there's all types of groups, especially in the area of Iraq. Because Iraq has always been a hotbed of controversy and magic and occult and all types of things going on in Iraq. That's the nature of that place. They say they have more revolutions in Iraq than anywhere in the world. Right? There's always something underground happening. Okay? So that's the third area. The fourth area is the people of Tasawwuf. Right? And when he starts studying their teachings, and he said, they believe not only in a theoretical knowledge, because they're based in Islam, but they also believe in experience knowledge, empirical knowledge. So that part of your knowledge is based on your experiences. It's things happening to you, things around you, what you went through in your life. It's not just straight out theory where you can just read it in a book. It's something else. And that's what they're saying is ihsan. Because what is ihsan? How do you develop ihsan? You can't quantify something like that. Some people say if you want to develop ihsan, then you should try to make your prayers as good in private as it is in the open. If you can do that, then you're developing ihsan. Try to do more things for Allah secretly, not public. So when you give your zakat or sadaqah, try to give it secretly. If you give it secretly, it's only for Allah, right? If you give it publicly, which is not wrong, by the way, but in many cases, riyah can come. I built this mosque, put my name on the door, whatever, right? So riyah can come in. But when you're doing it privately, then you're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a science. This is ihsan, right? Okay? So these are the four areas that Imam al-Ghazali studied when he starts feeling a little bit shaky. He's read almost every book in the library. Okay? So now he wants to look at this knowledge thing. Okay, so we're going to stop at this point here now. And then we'll go on next week. And we'll come back to Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, at this point in his life when he's going through this change. So we'll see you next week, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.